Police in Hong Kong say they have arrested 2 men in connection with a mob attack.
China's national parliament has approved.
Protesters have amassed to at this point, and they have, you can see they have
of pro-democracy protesters.
政府咧係不斷講咧，香港係七百。
Pro-democracy movement Joshua Wong is drawing official complaints from China.
CNN's Anna Corin has that story.
Hong Kong was a major city in China until China was forced to cede Hong Kong to Britain in 1841 due to the loss of the Opium Wars. Hong Kong became the crown colony of the British colony until 1997, before the handovers. Instead of being fully under Chinese control, the Sino and British declaration was to have Hong Kong as a SAR, also known as a Special Administrative Region. This will allow Hong Kong to have its own economy, government, and all sorts of independence and freedom. Hong Kong is currently an incredibly globalized and developed nation, and is one of the 3 world-recognized international finance centers standing next to London and New York. It has a booming economy and is a global business and trading hub. Not only in an economic standpoint, we can say that it is the most cultured and diverse nation in the world. Or at least Asia, at least.
Hong Kong is made up of an extremely diverse group of people. Over the last decade, the number of non-ethnically Chinese people living in Hong Kong has increased by 70.8%. In a South China Morning Post report done in 2016 based on a population by census stated that there was a total of 584,383 people from different ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong, constituting 8% of the city's population. To break it down further, 80% were from Asia, majority of the non-Chinese residents from countries including the Philippines, Indonesia, all over Southeast Asia, etc., and only 10% of the population being whites. Within these different ethnic groups, the line of separation is where the in-group and out-group come in, each with their own strongly upheld ideologies. The very influential and outspoken in-group consists of the proud Hong Kongers who are initiating the protests. The out-group, on the other hand, is just as prevalent, being the mainland Chinese living in Hong Kong, as well as Hong Kongers who do not have a problem with Hong Kong going back to China, often the ones against the protests. These are the main 2 distinct groups, but the foreigners and expats that reside in Hong Kong are a big part of the in-group as well. Although they might not be directly involved with the protests or may not connect to them at all, many of the foreigners living in Hong Kong are living there due to work reasons. This means that they are living in the country for the purpose of ultimately furthering the development of the growing successful economy that Hong Kong has today. They do have their own community, however, still contribute to this in-group because of their support towards the Hong Kong economy, not necessarily China's.
On April 3rd, Hong Kong's government introduced plans for changes to legislation that would allow criminal suspects to potentially be extradited to China. Critics warned that the bill would undermine Hong Kong's legal freedoms and might be used to intimidate or silent dissidents. On June 9th, an estimated of 1 million people marched to the government headquarters to show they were against the proposed bill. They then protested every weekend, and the peak population of protesters are estimated at 2 million, which is about a quarter of the population of Hong Kong. The main idea of the Hong Kong protesters is that they want free elections that are not controlled by a communist government. During the protests, they called out various countries, especially the US, to liberate their country. And because their determined mindset, pro-democracy protests were often portrayed as hero victims who are fighting for freedom globally. However, due to the violent reaction from CCP, it soon became incredibly violent and fatal. We know what this group existed before the protest. The Chinese government has always wanted to achieve one China policy with Taiwan, which foreshadowed the arrogant plan to take over Hong Kong as well. The clash between those 2 groups formed when the protest started. When an imaginative idea becomes physical violence, both sides tend to get aggressive. It's also important that both sides, in a third perspective, have both right and wrongs. In such a democracy-based globalized world, we're used to the freedom of choice. The lens is explicitly worked out by years of adaptation, also known as the social cognitive theory, where the social norm is to accept liberal choices. So, even with the existence of CCP, a communist party can be a disturbance to the general public. Pro-Beijing people are often vilified because of the representation and the identity of the Chinese community itself over the years, like looting, etc. While the in-group wants their free election and peace, the out-group thinks that this is just a minor change, and they believe that they prefer the laws under the mainland China. The out-groups also comes with the denial of difference, where an out-group protester said that Hong Kong and Taiwan are actually part of China, and that every country recognizes it. He also added that this sort of change will improve Hong Kong's government, making a rather hoping statement for the better government system. On the other hand, Joshua Wong, one of the figureheads of the Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, said that they want stability and enjoy prosperity. And if Hong Kong can enjoy free elections, there would be no violence and more protests. The two groups often clash with a symbolic act. For example, the burning of the CCP flag. This footage shows that after pro-democracy protesters burn their flags, pro-Beijing protesters start to engage in a physical, violent activity.
To dig deeper in our research in identifying the different in-groups and out-groups as well as the level of cultural diversity there is in Hong Kong, we interviewed two international school students who are currently living in Hong Kong. The first is a third culture teenager, Korean American in Hong Kong, who is not originally from Hong Kong but has lived there her entire life. She discusses the vast diversity of Hong Kong, stating that even though people speak Cantonese, you can see so many people from different races everywhere. Gwai Lo, American, British, Filipinos, Indonesians, and many more. She also mentioned how most people move here because of job opportunities. Following, we interviewed another teenager who was born in Hong Kong but is originally from Australia and China. She has lived in Hong Kong for almost her whole life as well. She felt that given her background, she doesn't feel subjected to one group in particular. Furthermore, both of the interviewees stated the common idea that they find the foreign community in fact, quote-unquote, annoying and frustrating when it comes to the most recent events.
I sometimes find it ironic how some of these expats or international school students think that they can say all this stuff when in reality all of these laws such as the extradition would mainly be impacting those who are actually from Hong Kong, whereas these international groups can just leave whenever they can. But for us, Hong Kong is our home, so it would affect us the most.
There are approximately over 500,000 foreigners living in Hong Kong, with a population of just 7.5 million. Every year, there is an increase in numbers of expats as Hong Kong continues to be such a tempting destination to reside and work in. Hong Kong is a global business and trading hub with a booming economy that has lenient and tolerant measures for new, growing businesses and foreign as well. Not only is the fact that the nation is such an apt location for high return business, working visas and finding residence is quite easy regardless of what country the person is from. This explains not only the high numbers of businessmen or prospects, but also why there are over 100,000 Filipinos in Hong Kong, mostly working as housemaids. Hong Kong already has a foundational culture or Western culture embedded into the whole nation, not only due to the British colonization, but also the increasing development of Western targeted areas because of a high and constant numbers of Western expats. Hot places such as shopping malls, beaches, cafes, restaurants, or a lot of houses and apartments that have the Western vibe. Because of the large numbers of foreigners living in Hong Kong, who are the minorities living in one tiny dot of a nation, they create their own communities. These communities push Hong Kong to maintain its level of Western and diverse culture that has been continued ever since the British rule. These people are not viewed as what typical minorities group would face, such as stigma, because they are embedded into Hong Kong's culture and are a prominent factor on why Hong Kong is such a culturally rich and globalization in many aspects, which is what the Hong Kong people are proud of. As Erica mentioned earlier, quote, there are so many people of different groups and cultures, so we basically all fit in. After China's loss in the Opium Wars, they handed over Hong Kong for peace on August 29, 1841, with the Treaty of Nanking. During this time, a lot of churches and schools were founded by British Christian missionaries, and Hong Kong grew immensely in both the economic standpoint and became one of the wealthiest modern outposts of the British colony, and grew to be culturally rich as well. After over 150 years of rule, Britain handed Hong Kong back to China in July 1997, under the condition that Hong Kong would be a special administrative region for 50 years. Albeit Hong Kong is not under the British rule anymore, but their footprints still definitely linger. This can simply be seen by walking on the streets of Hong Kong with all the old European architecture and churches, the countless British curriculum schools, and also the supermarkets, with snacks mostly from the UK. This handover not only created an independent nation, but also split the nation's people into groups not only by ethnicity, but ideology, as Aislyn stated in the beginning.
Throughout this documentary, we have been able to broaden our understanding on Hong Kong's current situation and status through different events that help categorize and portray in-groups and out-groups in regards to both people with varying perspectives of Hong Kong and split ethnic groups as well. This was shown through the studies and numbers of Hong Kong's increasingly diverse culture. Moreover, in the interviews, we were able to get firsthand what some of the in-group and out-group ideologies are, and what the students' opinions were on the current events, as well as the cultural globalization of Hong Kong. To sum it all up, cultural globalization, as we have come to learn through the connection between current and historical events, heavily impacts the formation as well as the identities of the in-groups and out-groups of Hong Kong citizens.